morning. Did you see my evil twin who was here a couple of minutes ago? Yeah, he's bad. He's a bad one. Watch out for him. Just one quick thing before I begin talking. I'm going to talk about mammals today for a change. With the bird protocol that we have on the ship, there's several things that are going on behind the scenes, and kind of what you see is that the ship is darker at night, and that for the most part the blinds are pulled for a period of time. I think you understand why we're doing that now, and I hope it's not an inconvenience, but just remember that it does get very dark on the ship at night when we have all the lights out. But more importantly, and this is not a criticism of anybody, but somebody actually, one of the guests actually caught a bird this morning and released it, which was very nice, but also a little bit dangerous. So we're gonna ask you that if you do find a bird, just back away, let one of us know right away. They'll call me and I'll come and do the release, because part of what we want to do is make sure that the bird is actually not injured before we let it go, because you can't always tell. And then you might, philanthropically try to release it over the side and it just falls into the ocean because it can't fly yet. So we do want to make sure that we're thinking a little bit. But the other thing too is they do bite, as I demonstrated before. And even though I know what I'm doing, I still get bitten sometimes. So just be cognizant of that. If you do find something, just find one of us or go to guest services. They can find us if you can't, okay? All right, so moving on. I'm going to talk today about something quite different. I do more than birds. When you've been in the business as long as me, you know stuff. And so I like to try to share some of the other things as well. So one of my passions, actually, beyond birds is mammals. I just love mammals. And I find the land mammals quite fascinating. I find the sea mammals quite fascinating too, but I find them also frustrating because they're hard to identify. I take a lot of pictures, as do most people that do this, simply because you might be surprised what it is that you find in your photo. And I did find yesterday I photographed one of the creatures, and nobody else had noticed what it was, but it turned out to be a new species of sea mammal for me. And I forget the name of it already, but let's call it Jeff's sea mammal. Okay. I'll work on the name after that. That's where I'm starting. I have a photo to go from. I know that Chris is going to be doing a presentation on marine mammals, and I believe he's going to have a photo in there of Jeff's sea mammal. He might have a different name beside it, but that'll be the one. So let's talk a little bit about mammals in Central and South America. Now, this clearly cannot be something that's going to teach you everything about all the mammals, but I just wanted to give you an idea of flavor of some of the things, particularly as we get up towards the tropics here. Now, on a journey like this, as far as terrestrial mammals are concerned, we won't see too much, simply because we're not spending enough time in the right habitats. We're not necessarily going to the right places. But when we went to Iquique, the people that went high up into the Andes, we actually saw wild llamas up there, and we saw vicuña. And so it was kind of neat to do that. In the previous leg, we had seen the Patagonian fox, and we had seen the European rabbit, which actually is called Brazilian rabbit over here. So as we go around, keep your eyes open, because even though we are sort of just touching the surface of where we're traveling, we have a chance of seeing certain things. And there are some there are some aquatic mammals that are also terrestrial, like the capybara, and I'll show you them in a couple of minutes. So as we go through the canal, we might have a little better chance of seeing some of the other stuff. But regardless of whether we see it, it's always kind of nice to know what's there. So we could, if we do come back and explore this area in a different mode off of a ship, you have more time, exposure to them, you might be pleased to see what's out there. So on the cover here of this, of course, this is one of the sloths, and I think that everybody's pretty excited about seeing those. If you've ever been to Costa Rica, that's sort of one of the strongholds, not the only stronghold by any means, but one of the strongholds where you have access to these, and they're quite docile. They don't like people, even though we think they do, because they don't run away, but they are tolerant of us. There's several species, but there's generally the two-toed and the three-toed sloth. And you can see quite clearly in this picture here, this is one of the three-toed ones that's out there. So just looking, obviously map of where one is in the world. I think you all know this, but just in case you don't. So we are down, is this working? There we are. So we are we're down here on the floor, working our way up. I guess Ecuador's down here somewhere, and we're going to be coming up the Colombian coast, and then of course Panama, the Darien region of Panama is there, and then we're going to be coming through the Panama Canal at this point, and then sailing north eventually through Central America. So we really, near shore, we're just really going to touch Panama, and I think the next stop is Cozumel, I believe, if I'm correct. So we're going to be sailing through the waters, and it'll be all marine mammals for that part. But as we're going through the canal area here, do be alert to what's going on around you, because it might be quite interesting for you. And in South America, of course, I think we know where we've been. Starting, the cruise before this, we started right down here. We are now somewhere pretty close to here. The equator comes across right around here somewhere. So we're almost in Ecuadorian waters. Certainly, I think sometime today we will be. Tomorrow we'll definitely be, because we're going to be on land. So again, with the birds, when I did that, I'm going to teach you about 2,400 species of birds in 40 minutes. Well, it's just about as challenging to try to do this. And part of it has to do with all the different types of things that are there. So one thing, for example, 500 species of mammals. Now, lots of those are bats, lots of those are mice, lots of those are invisible. Don't see those. Big stuff, it's much, much lower. But look at the diversity here. We have 2,000 species of butterflies at least. I don't think I even put the reptiles and amphibians on here, but there are hundreds and hundreds of those as well. So we are going through an ecosystem that is really, really rich in wildlife, both from the perspective of the birds and everything else that's ahead of us. So again, same thing here, type of habitats that we're exploring, whether we're going past the desert where we had those large mammals that we saw, we're going past the jungles, we went through the fjords before, we're going through this open water, open lake system of the Panama Canal, coming up through the Caribbean. The habitats are just incredible that we travel through. For everything from agricultural to urban stuff. Urban stuff's not great for mammals, except if you're in North America, lots of squirrels and raccoons. Rats are everywhere. But you do find that in those urban landscapes, anywhere in the world, that the predators are adapting, they're moving in. I think we're familiar with the coyotes of North America, how urbanized they are. And luckily, we seem to be tolerant of them for the most part, which is good, because it used to be, if you hear of a coyote, somebody wanted it caught and killed or sent away somewhere. But I think now we realize that we have habitats within even the urban centers, and then the birds and the small mammals that are living there become food for the bigger mammals. And if you have a cat or a dog, maybe they're dinner. Maybe, but that's okay though. So I guess just looking back in time, and this is just kind of an interesting little thing that I came across. So we have had catastrophic extinction events over the years. So for example, 12,500 years before Christ, there was 37 genera. So genera, when you speak about animals, you speak of species. So we are Homo sapiens, so we are a species. All right, so you have two names. The Homo is the man, and sapiens is what we are. If we look at deer, so deer would be a genera. So that means sort of a whole bunch of animals that are similar characteristics, maybe physically, probably physically, but also with respect to their DNA. So they're sort of classified as this big group of things that are similar. Then within that, we get very specific. So we have a white-tailed deer, we have a Sitka deer, we have a brocket deer in the South America. So we basically go down. So there was 37 of these big classes of animals, sort of the parent, if you will, that went extinct during that event. And they know that because of the archaeological digs they've done, the dinosaur finds, digs like dinosaur finds, where they found that these events happen, and just a massive number of animals disappeared there. There was things that used to be called mega herbivores, and they were, well, herbivore is something that eats plants, vegetation. So these were big. So when if you had a grazing horse, the horse would make our little one look like a Shetland pony, because these were massive animals. All of those were wiped out, and none of them ever recovered to come back as a new species in the future. So that entire strain of these mega herbivores was gone. And they were all through this area as well, the route that we're traveling, particularly the tropical regions of it. Monkeys emerged about 35 million years ago in Africa, and then at that point, Africa and South America were joined. So there was the movement across the gap. So we had monkeys in both areas. But now they've evolved to the point that you have old world monkeys in Africa, and you have new world monkeys on this side of the ocean. And they're quite different sometimes, similar but different. So different behaviors, different species, obviously. So there was quite a big move back then as well. There's in Brazil, this, for example, there's 600 species of mammals that are in Brazil alone. So this side of the Atlantic, or side of the Pacific, actually is not as rich in mammals as Brazil, but remember how big Brazil is. I mean, you look at this, is a massive country, and the habitats are everything from coastal to the Cerrado forest in the south, and you get up to the mountain ranges up in the north, so it's pretty huge. All of South America, over 1,300 species of mammals, so a good representation here. You know, we're at about 40% of the mammals that can be found in all of South America will be found along the route that we're traveling somewhere there. And then, of course, we had the movement into North America during those ice ages and after the ice ages of animals going up and down the continent. So we would have had a fairly significant change in the type of mammals that occurred in southern South America about 12,000 years ago, because that's when that massive ice age moved through here, about the same time that the last ice age moved through North America. So a lot of stuff would have been quite new to the area. And we sort of think, I'm talking here about millions of years normally, but really a lot of this development of animals and movement of animals actually occurred in the last 10, 12,000 years. So it shows you a little bit about resilience of wildlife as well. So, you know, with what we're doing to the planet now and hopefully fixing slowly, even if it was catastrophic, at some point in the future, nature's going to take over again, and this is going to persist. We won't see it, but hopefully if the patterns persist and we haven't done too much damage, then I think there is hope for the future, good hope for the future. All right, so just talking now about a few of the groups of things that are here. So the New World monkeys here, and listed there are some of the types of monkeys that you could see. Now, most of these are tropical. So the typical thing that's like, say, from Ecuador north up to Mexico would pretty much be it. I don't think there's any monkeys in the States, are there? I mean, I know there's no native ones, but I don't think there's even wild populations. Am I correct in that? It's interesting because they haven't quite made it from Mexico up, and maybe that desert barrier, once you get past the Yucatan, maybe that's been a sufficient barrier. I'm sure there's a few that people have had as pets and have gotten away, but they've never established themselves as a population, which is probably a good thing. So some of the animals here that you can see, they come in various sizes too. Some of them are diurnal, some of them are nocturnal, so daytime, nighttime. Some of them are arboreal only, which means they live only in the trees. Some of them are actually quite terrestrial and then run freely on the ground. Some use tails, like the prehensile tails, for swinging through the vines, so to speak, and some of them don't. So there's really a tremendous amount of variability with them. And one thing that I find that is quite surprising is that they're very hard to identify. You would think, like, you look at a monkey, you know, you look at this little guy here, and you think, well, that should be easy there. So that's a Geoffroy's, not named after me, but close, like so close. That's a Geoffroy's spider monkey. So there's a bunch of different types of spider monkeys, and they're all kind of skinny, long-legged, long-tailed, and they freely move through the trees like that. But there's a bunch of other spider monkeys that are really similar as well, like the Central American spider monkey. So for our purposes, it's okay to just call them spider monkeys. The scientist wants to know which one of those. Some of them are tiny. There's a little one called, is it on here or not? One of the marmosets, the second or third one down there. They are like this big. They're literally, I have pictures of them with a banana. And the banana is just like they're hugging their baby. The banana looks so big compared to them. So some of these little guys are quite tiny, and you might be surprised when you see one if you ever happen to go to a jungle lodge or something like that, which is where you have a better chance of this, how tiny some of these things are. And then you get to the big ones like the howler monkeys, and they're just massive, so they were quite exciting. So here's an example, for example, of the black howler monkey. This is a big monkey, and a male would probably stand about this tall. They make that incredible noise, that, you know, the howling noise that can be heard for kilometers away. So they're really quite something. In some of the species, the male and female are different colors, I think in most of the species now. So the black one here is the male black howler, but there is a rusty colored female, which same shape and stuff, a little bit smaller, but different, but also they can make noise as well. The sound that they make can carry across the jungle, and it's really quite remarkable because they use it to talk to each other in their band, but also to warn the other bands that are out there that this is my country, so you stay away. And so what they have to do is they have to defend the territory for food, because the food is scattered about. It's not like us that plants a crop of corn or soybeans or lettuce, and we just know where those things are individually. If we farmed the way that nature does, we would have one lettuce plant over here, and one lettuce plant over there, and a bean plant here, and a tomato plant there. And that's what nature does, is that they don't put all their seeds in one basket, so to speak. But that way, it makes it harder for the wildlife because they have to move through this whole realm and find the food as it appears. So they need this large territory just so they can make sure that they have food not only daily, but seasonally. And it changes with the seasons. So here's just some facts about them. So typically a troop, which is what you call a bunch of monkeys, is about 30 species. And then it's about a 2 to 3 ratio. So 2 females for every male. So the females are popular, obviously. Not all the guys get lucky. But enough do that we have baby monkeys eventually there as well. So they're quite long-lived. And you'll find this with most of the bigger monkeys, medium to big, that they are long-lived because usually they only have one baby. So that means that you have to make sure you survive. There's lots of predators. So if, for example, you might live in an area where the jaguars exist, they're going to feed on the monkeys. There's eagles down in Central America that will actually eat monkeys. There's ones that actually specifically target monkeys as part of their food. So there's a lot of things trying to eat the monkeys that are out there. So your reproductive rate being low means that you need to make sure that each of the females that's available gets a mate. So if you had a ratio the other way, then not all the females would get impregnated, and you kind of might risk or make your chance of survival a bit less in that regard. They call it dawn. Females are the loudest. What are the odds? Oh, stop it. Oh, who said that? Oh my God. And that's why I've been married twice. It's interesting, the shape of the skull, and we see the animal, of course, you see they're big-headed, and they sort of have this protruding forehead, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that the sound that they make has to resonate inside the skull, and as it moves out, it's sort of this echo chamber, if you will, and it really, really makes the sound go much further into the forest. And when you live in a dense forest, you can imagine it'd be like yelling against a wall and expecting somebody on the other side to hear you, but because of the way they produce the sound, it'll move much, much farther through this dense forest, and the animals can hear it. You'll also find that quite often at dawn, they'll climb higher in the trees, up on a ridge, yell across the valley, so the other guys know that these people are still active here. So we're looking at 2 miles away there. And then they also have a wonderful sense of smell, which is important if you're trying to find food in the jungle. So it says here, for example, 2 miles away is not a difficult thing for these monkeys to smell the fruits, for example, or figs or whatever it is. And they're primarily eating the herbivores, so they're probably eating vegetation, leaves, and the fruit. So they can smell the fresh crops, if you will, and make their way there. So they rest a lot. You'll see them quite often, particularly there on the left is a female howler monkey, and they just sort of lay around the trees. So it's really quite interesting to see them some days. Then we have another one, a much smaller monkey, called the capuchin group, and one of them that's quite common in Mexico in particular, and Panama, is the white-faced capuchin here. So again, we live in fairly large groups, sometimes just a couple of animals, but sometimes, 20, 30 animals is not uncommon. These guys are fast. They zoom around, they run on the ground readily, they climb the trees readily, and they're really, really quite engaging. And they also can be very aggressive. So we need to be careful if you're at some of these resorts, if you go to Costa Rica or whatever, where they happen to be, Honduras, there's lots of them there, that they become acclimated to people quite readily, and then they will come and try to grab stuff from you. So people feed them thinking, isn't this fun? But the risk is that they get more and more aggressive, and they have very, very sharp teeth. So if you can imagine a small dog, it still has teeth. And these things aren't afraid to, not trying to bite you necessarily, but they're trying to get the food, and they don't really think that I should be gentle with you. So there's something that you need to be careful of in some areas because they're so used to people. So they're not territorial for the most part. They do seem to intermingle much more so than some of the other monkey species do, but they still are aware of the boundaries of the members of their own troop, so that they can make sure that from a perspective of relationships between the individual animals, the knowledge of their behaviors, and this is important to them, that they keep that integrity of the troop even when they're moving through and passing other troops along the way. So that's kind of an intriguing thing they have there. It takes about 2 years before the young, after they're born, raised. It takes about the second year before they actually start to get into the breeding cycle. And that's pretty small, or pretty normal for a small monkey like this. The bigger ones would actually take longer to go from being sort of fully fledged and then able to take care of themselves as part of the breeding cycle there as well. They're also important, as a fourth or fifth bullet down there says, about seed dispersal. So we kind of wonder then, like, how do you get, I'll use my lettuce example, how do you get a lettuce seed over there, and another lettuce seed over there, and my tomato seed over there, or if I'm looking at a Brazil nut tree, or I'm looking at some other Diceratop, whatever it happens to be that I'm in a natural forest, how do those seeds get all over the place? Well, partly it's because of monkeys. So monkeys will eat the fruit, they will swallow the pit whole, or the seed whole, and basically poop it out. So as they're moving through the jungle over all this area, they're basically ensuring that the next crop of whatever food they need happens to be ready for them. Lots of birds do that as well. So it's not just the monkeys that are dispersing, but most of the wildlife that are eating the fruits are actually dropping them around the forest so that we get these individual types of plants that are necessary for all these animals to survive. They have a lot of vocalizations, as do most monkeys. So they have I guess I'm calling it trill here, but it's a communication where they have a specific sound that is in response to a predator. And they know exactly what that means. And we see this if we start to study these things a little bit. We see this in all kinds of populations around the world. Whether it's a chickadee in our backyard that makes a different noise if it happens to identify the fact that a hawk is nearby. Well, the monkeys do that same thing. There's monkeys in India where I went to work with tigers for a little while once, and they have a specific noise that they make when the tigers are around. And once you become attuned to that, long before you see a tiger, you know it's somewhere near you, so you can get a little more cautious if necessary. Hunted for food, still. So some of the Aboriginal tribes will still hunt these things, particularly in the remote areas and throughout we're not going to be in the Amazon, but we're not too far away, actually, when we get into Ecuador. But certainly there are some tribes there that are still hunting these things for food. There is, of course, a black market trade as well for wildlife meat, which is unfortunate, but something that's pretty hard to do. So there's just a whole bunch of stuff here about the spider monkeys and squirrel monkeys. And this is two different groups of monkeys, and they're both kind of similar. They're both skinny, long-tailed, long-limbed, and quite often difficult to tell apart, though. So we have just some information there, I think, that sort of reiterates what I just said about the type of food. It's not only fruit, but it's also different types of nuts. It's nectar. It's bird eggs as well. So a lot of these nice little cuddly monkey things are actually very good predators as well. I don't recall if there's any of them that are actual scavengers on dead meat, but it wouldn't surprise me too much. I know that in Africa they've learned recently by 20, 30 years ago, that they actually will eat carrion and become quite an aggressive hunter for things like that. I don't think we have any in this part of the world that do that, but they're certainly not averse to eating a baby bird if they find one as they're going through, or an egg as they go there. The weight we can talk about, or don't need to talk about. So they live quite long, and again, these are medium-sized monkeys, so 15 to 20 years in the wild is not uncommon for them. And again, that's important if you're only going to have one young, and you got to make sure you have enough babies left for the next generations as well. They do, even though they take 2 years to get to the breeding cycle, within a year they're basically on their own. So they've learned in that year by watching their parent, or mom usually, how to feed, how to find the food, where are the good trees, where's water if you need it, what does a predator sound like, predator look like. They learn all those skills, and the ones that aren't too good at school, well, they don't make it. The ones that are good are the ones that are going to be able to carry the next generation forward and teach. So the learning, particularly in the monkey clans, is really, really important. The parents spend a great deal of time making sure that the babies, if you will, know how to survive in the wild. Other animals, not so much, but the monkeys are very, very protective and nurturing of their young there. I think I'll leave the rest of those. So it's just a shot here of sort of a famous monkey here named Baker. So 1984, he was the squirrel monkey who became, in 1959 became up into space. And it was really, really exciting that this monkey was there. Sounds kind of cruel at the time, but the monkey came back safely and became rather a famous little monkey as a result of it. So this was a little squirrel monkey that sort of has a place in history that not many other monkeys have. You can read about him. He's quite, on the internet, it's pretty easy to find out information about this little guy. So kind of a neat little story for him. And then we have another thing. Oh, there's that name again. Look at that. Almost me again. I'm going to change my name, I think. I'm just going to change one letter, and then all these things are probably named after me, and who would know? This is the tamarin. Now, this is a different type of monkey, and I don't know if you remember sort of the structure of when I showed you the squirrel monkey picture. Very long, skinny legs, very long tail. These guys are much more squat, much shorter legs, more powerful-looking legs. The tail is still longish, but nothing near as long as it was on the squirrel monkeys that I showed you before. So again, these are quite common. So there's a few different types that are out there. And most of the ones, the tamarins that I'm aware of, I think are in the Panama and north, sort of in that Panama to Honduras, Belize type zone area. But I believe they also occur down into Colombia. I think I've seen them there at some point in the past. They eat plants, insects, fruit, etc., etc. And then they are both daytime active, so diurnal, and tree active primarily, so arboreal. And that's kind of an important thing because the predators that they would face would be exactly the ones that hunt in the trees in the daylight. So for example, if there was a big owl species, or if you had a jaguar that only hunted at night, they would be relatively safe from that unless the jaguar found them sleeping somewhere. But because they're active in the daytime, they're more likely to be attacked by one of the big eagles that might be down in Central America, for example. The harpy eagle is one that's big enough to catch and kill an adult monkey, a good-sized monkey. So there's a different type of predator that will attack them depending on if they're day or night active there as well. So 1 to 2 young in this particular case, so it's kind of good they have a little bit better chance if they can have 2 young. If times are lean, that even if they have 2, probably only 1 will survive. And that's pretty common in nature, is that not all the kids make it, and it really has to do with how plentiful the food is and how easily they can get at it. And that, of course, is impacted partly by us, because as we move through and remove habitat and fragment it, food becomes harder and harder to find, so your populations tend to go down a little bit as a result of that. But when you have continuous forests that are joined to each other, then the chance of survival is much higher for there. One interesting thing about them is that they mimic a certain type of flycatcher, a group of flycatcher calls. And I've never been able to figure out why, but they clearly do this. And I've read about it in the books, and there was some research done, and nobody can quite figure out why a monkey would want to sound like a flycatcher, which of course is a bird. And it's just an odd, weird behavior, and it's consciously, and it's usually when there's flycatchers hunting there. And I don't know what it means, but it was just something I thought I'd put in because somebody might one day go, I know the answer. Any of you? Okay, I got to get another job after this then, all right. Okay, the titis are tiny little monkeys, and these are really, really neat. And you can see here, now they're getting into more different looking shapes now, so we can see this little guy here. It's quite small, so it's like this big, sort of cuddly size. Big bushy tail on most of them like that, and then short little dumpy legs there. And they're sort of an odd group of monkeys that they're fairly small. The family groups are fairly small. And unlike the squirrel monkeys and spider monkeys, they actively will defend violently their territory against other titis. Not against the other monkeys, but just other ones within their species. And again, it is a protection of the habitat and the food source, so they have enough food to get around. Because their territories are relatively small, so there's not enough room for the neighbors to come in and steal the fruit, because they need to take care of themselves there. Again, they're arboreal and diurnal, so daytime, tree time. They're monogamous, which means that they basically form a bond with one male, one female, and then they will take care of the baby together with the female taking the lead role. Food is similar to everything else, fruits, nuts, leaves, etc., and of course birds' eggs. So pretty much all the monkeys will take on those. Moving from monkeys, this is the capybaras. This is the largest rodent in the world. This is something that we have a really good chance of seeing as we go through the Panama Canal, like not in the area where there's the narrow locks, but when we go across some of the lakes, because the canal is not just a continuous band of concrete. There are some breaks in it as we go through where you'll see habitat around you. So when we go through those in particular, be outside and have a look because you're going to see stuff on the water. Through the canal part, it's interesting because of all the machinery and stuff, but the more exciting part for me is when we get the little lakes and stuff that we cross periodically as we go through there. So these things are big. They're like this big, so they're a serious rodent there when you see them. They're quite harmless to us, but they're just sort of an odd-looking shaped thing. It's like a giant rat with a flat face, if you will. And they can swim beautifully. They can dive. They spend a lot of time in their water eating vegetation and stuff like that, but they can also run quite rapidly on land. So underwater, they can dive and stay under for 5 minutes, as it says there, for example. They eat a lot of food a day, so 3 kilograms is about 6.5 pounds of food a day. Just to give you an idea of what that means. So that's a lot of food, when you consider, I'm not quite sure what the weight of them is when they're fully grown, but it's a good percentage of their body weight every day that they have to eat. Lots of young. And sometimes you'll see these little pig-like things running around, and there's these little brown, a different color brown, but there's little guys running around behind them. They grow very rapidly. They're very prolific. Everything eats them, from the big hawks through to jaguars, and everything eats these guys. So they're an amazing part, an important part of the cycle of life in the tropics. And then they are really tasty, apparently. I've never eaten it myself, but apparently you have? Yeah. And they are as good as they say? Yeah, they taste just like chicken, I'll bet, right? Yeah. Just like a good piece of beef or something? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, good barbecue. Okay, let's do it. Let's do it. Oh, wait, no, I'm with Vikings. Sorry. No. Okay, here's another little creature here, and this is called an agouti, and the agouti kind of looks like a mini capybara, if you will. So it's a bizarre little thing with a little weird flat doggish face, or almost rabbit face, if you will, or horse face, I don't even know. And then this little tiny short stubby legs on it, no tail at all. There's a bunch of different species, but they all have this same little posture. They're quiet, they just kind of sneak through. They're quite tolerant of people in the forest, but they're just they slink, and you never hear a twig break. Suddenly it's there, and then it's not. And so it's really, really interesting to see them. So there's 12 species in South and Central America, all the same looking. You look for where the little rusty colors are on them and habitat and stuff like that. They have very powerful teeth and jaws, which becomes important because when you go down to that right-hand side where it talks about the Brazil nuts. So Brazil nut, it comes off a big tree in the tropics, and it's such a tough shell around the seed that almost none of the animals can break it open. And if you rely on it just rotting away and the seed coming out eventually, well, the seed usually rots at the same time. So you need something that can break it open. And it's basically the agouti is the one animal that actively looks for these as part of its diet. It gnaws through, gets the pulp that it wants, the seed is released, and then if you're lucky, a Brazil nut comes out at the other end of the whole thing. Orchid bees have something to do with Brazil nuts. It's a bit of a different story, but you need the Brazil nut tree in order to have the orchid bees, which are an important pollinator in the tropics as well. So if you didn't have the agouti breaking open the seed, making a Brazil nut tree, you wouldn't have the orchid bee, which means that you probably wouldn't be able to get the new trees pollinated anyways, plus other species of trees. So there's this weird complex thing between agoutis and bees that has to happen for part of the forest at least to be healthy. 2 to 4 young per year, 2 broods usually, so they are very prolific. Again, they are a major prey species for practically everything. They have this, what I call freeze and dash, which you will see if you ever see them, is, as I said, they kind of move rapidly, they stop dead. And somehow, because of the colors of them, which are, sort of match the hues of the forest, and their skinny little legs, they just disappear. And you can literally be watching it and go like, where did it go? And it's like standing there. And then they'll go again, fast. And so it confuses the predators, because the predators are used to an animal that flees, so runs, and just keeps running until it either gets away or gets caught. Whereas these guys run, dash, stop, turn, stop. And it confuses the predators. And it's actually quite a good mechanism for survival for these types of animals. They live quite a long time, so 13 to 20 years. And then here we are. Here's the ultimate predator. And this is the biggest cat. Well, I guess it's bigger actually than a mountain lion. Certainly stronger, more powerful, heavier than a mountain lion. And they're just a really, really incredible thing there. So third largest in the world, because when you look at the videos of the nature shows, they don't look that big, but they really are quite a big cat, and they're quite dangerous. They are tolerant of people a tiny bit. They are hunted a lot, unfortunately, most of it illegally. I've had one encounter with these in Costa Rica. It's okay now, but at the time, I was hiking through some forest just at dusk, and I was late getting back to where I wanted to be, and which is a bit dangerous. But I don't know, lost track of time or something, and I felt something weird. So I kind of stopped and I listened, didn't hear anything. I looked back, and about, say, the distance to the wall there's a jaguar sitting on the trail watching me. And I thought, oh crap! I wonder how far away the place is that I was staying. And I kind of watched it. I started to back away. I looked this way to make sure there was nothing there. I looked back and it was gone, which is actually even a scarier feeling because now I didn't know where it was. So I got all the way back and had a case of beer. And here I am today. So apparently I didn't get eaten. But that was kind of now it was really neat. At the time it was a very unnerving experience because I didn't know where it was as the moments went by. So they're quite big. So 1.2 meters is about 3 3/4 feet, up to about 6 and a bit. So 6 1/4 feet, 6.5 feet long. So not a bad sized cat. It's the kind of thing you don't want to wrestle with. That the males are quite a bit bigger than the female. They generally tend to be solitary. Both the males and females travel separately. The female will travel with the babies for a period of time, as many animals do. And then once the babies are big enough to take care of themselves, they go off and life starts over again. There's a list of some of the things they eat. And one of the things, a caiman, if you don't know what that is it's like a crocodile, like a smaller crocodile. So these cats actively will hunt the caimans, which is interesting because the caiman is one of the top aquatic predators in the tropics. So now you have this cat that is trying to hunt an aquatic animal that spends 99% of its time in the water. The cat will literally jump in the water, dive under, grab a caiman, kill it in the water, drag it out and eat it. And I haven't seen it in person, but I've seen the videos of them doing this. And it is just amazing that a terrestrial animal would be able to dive underwater, kill a big an animal almost as big as itself underwater in the other animal's element, and then basically bring it back to shore and eat it. So and I know there's some videos out there, but sometime look one of them up because there's a couple, I don't remember the name of it, but there were a couple that were really, really well done, whoever did the cinematography for those as well. And they eat lots of other stuff there as well. Top speed, 100 kilometers an hour, 60 miles per hour. Is that me? Is that you? No, not me. Must be you. So they're quite fast, so 60 miles an hour. Now that's a straight out. Now that's not steady run. These aren't marathon runners. None of the cats are. But if it was chasing like a brocket deer, which is one of the deer that you find in the tropics, that it could do that for a period of maybe 400 or 500 feet, and then they would just basically collapse exhausted and give up the hunt for that particular thing there. Their success rate is variable. So it really depends on an individual animal sometimes, but most predators, their success rate is like anywhere from 1 in 3 to 1 in 10 tries. Even the big cats of Africa, they try a lot more than they actually are successful as part of it. The vision, as the little ×6 says there, gives you an indication of how sharp their vision is compared to ours, 6 times better, which is why they can see animals, that we don't even know are there in front of us. You have this other little group of animals now called tamanduas, which are basically small anteaters. So this is just one here that I photographed, I think in Venezuela, this particular one. And they're similar to the anteaters. As I said, they're small. You can see that little funny nose. They do feed on termites and ants and stuff like that. And they're very, very sharp claws that they have on their little feet to dig out the termite mounds in particular. Mostly nocturnal, as are most of the other ant-eating, termite-eating type creatures that are down there as well. But unlike the anteaters, they spend a lot of time in the trees. So they are very, very good climbers as well. And it's interesting, I'm not sure if I put a picture here. I think another picture coming that shows how aggressive they are even towards a large predator like me. I'll show you the picture in just a second of what they think they can do. So they are capable of walking, but they're clumsy because they have these big claws, and it's kind of hard to walk, so they're sort of walking on their knuckles. so they can amble along, and they're not fast, but they can do it. They can do it if they have to, but they prefer to move through the trees and spend their time there unless they're feeding when they'll come down to the ground. So here's what one of these little guys looks like if it figures it's going to take me on. So this little guy was this big. It's just like, bring it on, you know. So it was just that, and I didn't harm him. I didn't stay with it long, but it was just such a fascinating encounter to see its behavior in response to me. So then obviously I moved back fairly quickly, and then it just ambled off as if nothing happened. And it goes like, see, don't mess with me. So here's the giant anteater. Now you're talking about a big creature. So if we use this as one end of the anteater, we're probably talking about something over here, and they're about this tall. They're kind of weird-looking things. You know, they're ungainly, lots of shaggy stuff on them. And then, of course, that snout with the big, long tongue, so they will use the claws to rip open the termite mounds and stick that big, long, sticky tongue in there and just lap them up, basically, by the thousands in the course of a night. So quite often you'll find when you go to areas where the termite mounds exist, I don't know if you've ever seen those in the tropics, but most tropical termites either will build a black ball in the tree, or they'll have these funny-shaped mounds that are on the ground that are usually rust-colored, dirt-colored. And it's those ones that the anteaters are hunting. So this thing, it looks like a solid, almost like brick, if you will, but just huge. You'll see sometimes the whole side ripped out of those, where these guys are trying to get at the termites that are inside them. So these long claws that they have are fundamental to that being successful. The little raccoon-y type things that we have, and if you've been to Mexico, at any resort in Mexico, you probably have seen these, if they have any vegetation left, and it's the coatimundi, and there's different species there. One of the problems that they're facing with these, like the North American raccoon, is that they're so used to people that they're aggressively coming to us for food. And because we think they're cute, we feed them, and of course the behavior gets more and more aggressive. They do have very sharp teeth, so they have canines like any dog does, and they have very sharp claws as well, so they're not trying to attack us, but again, it's coming to us as a food source, and give me your sandwich, give me your whatever. So it is something that we need to be cautious of with them. 67 centimeters long is about 2 feet, I think, give or take, something in that range. So they're closely related to raccoons, as I said there, and they're omnivorous, so that means that they eat everything from plants to animals, and they're very opportunistic. They'll scavenge on freshly dead carcasses as well, birds' eggs, baby birds. They'll eat fruit, they'll eat sandwiches, which they shouldn't, but they will. So they really do take on a large range of diet. And interestingly, they take on scorpions too. So they have figured out, many animals have figured out how to hunt the predators that are dangerous. So if you're a snake hunting animal, you learn how to deal with that. If you're hunting porcupines, you learn how to deal with that. If you're a scorpion hunter, you learn how to quickly disable the scorpion so that it can't sting you. Or you choose a species that even if they did sting you, it would just be like a minor prick and you're okay. So, but they have figured out how to do that kind of thing as well. Tarantulas, and I think we all know what a tarantula is, but tarantulas have hairs in their body, and they can be irritating to the respiratory system. It's much more dangerous than anything else that a spider could do to you. So if you were handling them and inhale these little hairs, they actually attach to the inside of your lung, and the same thing with the animals. So these things here, the coatimundis, have figured out that if you roll them in your hand for a while, most of the little hairs come off. And then what you're left with is this juicy little morsel that you can actually eat. So again, it's a behavioral thing that if you're going to survive, and if there's a food source, you need to figure out how to eat it. Okay, simple as that. So it's like the agouti, that it learned how to eat this very, very rich protein inside of the Brazil nut because it knew how to get inside to get at it. So all these things have figured this whole thing out. Lots of young, 4 to 6 young, very, very common for them. So you'll often see large troops of these, particularly going through the jungle as they come, and they're fairly quiet, but they're fast, and they're kind of zooming around, much different than a raccoon at home. Raccoons tend to amble and sort of slowly move from here to there. These guys are just zooming around, seems to be chasing whatever happens to be there. And part of what they're doing is they're trying to startle prey as well. So if they're eating bigger insects or small rodents or birds, the fact that they're moving fast would more likely startle the prey, which means they're visible, and then they have a better chance of getting at them. And then, so here we have, this is a shot from when I was in Panama, looking out of the balcony where I happened to be staying. So just looking at this troop of monkeys there coming for breakfast at the buffet. They didn't let them in, but they would have they would have come in if we had or if the people had let them do that there. So sometimes you can see pretty large numbers of these animals as they find their favorite food areas as well. Typically, when we're in an area that's more wild, then they would be wandering widely through the jungle. But when you do have the tropical resorts, you'll have populations that just literally live by the hotel trying to get whatever it is, whether that's leftover fruit from breakfast that they put into a compost pile, or whether it's people that are feeding them. They learn quickly that why wander through the jungles when there's food here every day. And then this is the raccoon, which actually does occur down into Central America as well. And they also have another one called a crab-eating raccoon, which looks very, very similar to it. The crab-eating is a bit skinnier and likes to climb trees more. I know the regular raccoons can as well, but the other one likes to do it even more. So they eat the same type of stuff down there that they would in North America. So they carry in the dead meat, they'll eat live meat, they'll eat birds, whatever they can find. And then interesting that they make a lot of noises. And if you've ever, normally we just see them, they're quiet and you don't hear much, but if you ever hear them like fighting or grappling over food or the mating cycle, or if they're nervous or scared of us, they have a tremendous number of noises they make, and we don't really appreciate that in animals much. We just kind of think that, they don't make any noise, or they roar like a lion. But even within the lions, those things would have different sounds that mean different things to different animals. So it is quite a remarkable thing to think of a raccoon having 50 words, if you will, or phrases to tell everything else what's going on. So it is a form of communication. It's not just random sounds that they make there as well. We talk about them washing their food. They're not actually washing their food. They're actually trying to feel the food to see what it's about. Is it edible? Is it just a slimy piece of, because they eat a lot in aquatic situations, is it just a slimy piece of wood, or is it actually something that they should be eating? So they'll move it around in their hands a lot. And sometimes they will do a little bit of rinsing with the dirt. It's not because they don't have saliva, which is often widely believed. It's about trying to get a bit of the mud off, if you will, if the water is available. If not, they're quite happy to eat the dirt and poop it out later. And then here's the crab-eating raccoon. So these ones are always near water, for example. They are similar, as I said. They're a bit longer tailed. They do seem to be a bit more, I think I said it backwards before. Sorry, they're more terrestrial than the other raccoon, but they're more nocturnal. I know that ours is pretty nocturnal, but they will be active in the daylight as well, the northern raccoon. But these guys really do stay out more at night, and they're hunted widely by other predators as well, which again makes sense to be less visible during the daytime there. They eat more of the stuff that you would find near the shore of some kind of body of water. So the mollusks, the insects, the amphibians, small reptiles if they're associated with water. So they're kind of a different type of raccoon that you recognize the raccoon immediately. You might not even be sure that it's a different one. Then we have this guy here called the crab-eating fox. And it's very similar to some of the other foxes that are down in South America. And most of them appear to be derived from either the gray fox of the southwest U.S., or the red fox that we're familiar with, but they clearly don't look like our foxes anymore. So they've evolved from that parent stock and then changed into some of these other ones. That this one looks more like a coyote, for example, although it's much smaller. It's probably about 2/3 the size of a coyote. And like any of those canid predators, it eats the same kind of stuff. It's a very aggressive, very efficient hunter, usually small prey though. So we'll be hunting small birds on the ground. We'll be hunting rabbits if you're in Argentina, for example. They'll be hunting various types of mice and stuff that will be on the ground. Probably the biggest thing that this would take might be an agouti. It would never take on a capybara because it probably would be killed by it. So there is a limit. If you're going to be a predator, be smart. Always hunt downsize. Never go up too big because there's a big risk to you as well. So very solitary. There's another one down here called the savanna fox, which again is similar. So quite often if you do see a fox, you need to get a picture of it to try to figure out which type of fox it is. And as you go further south into South America, there's other types of foxes as well, but all sort of this same grizzled gray with some kind of rust tones on them, which is kind of interesting that the red of the red fox we have in North America doesn't seem to come down this far for some reason. It's evolved out of their pelage. So it's called pelage when you talk about a mammal's fur. It's plumage when you talk about a bird's feathers. So if you hear the word pelage, P-E-L-A-G-E, that's what they're referring to, is basically the fur of these animals. So if we have trivia and I say, does anybody know what pelage is? Guess what? I'm not going to ask you. Okay, armadillos, whole bunch of different types of armadillos. In fact, there's, oh goodness, I'm not even sure how many species there are. There's a lot. I did a trip to Paraguay last December. I think we had 9 different types of armadillos in the small area that we surveyed. So they're much more common down in South America than they are even in Central America or North America. North America, we only have the 9-banded, but down here they have all kinds of different ones that they seem to increase in number as you get down all the way to the bottom of South America, or almost all the way to the bottom of South America. So just a couple of examples. 9-banded I mentioned is a North American one that comes well down into Central America. There's another one called naked tail. There's another one called yellow tail. And there's all kinds of different ones. And they come in different sizes as well, depending on the species and depending what they're hunting. But they're all sort of the same in that they are armored and they have these big claws. Now, not all of them can roll into a ball. So we kind of think, sort of the pictures of an armadillo as it gets threatened, rolls into a little tight ball and nothing can get in there. Very few of the species can actually do that. Most of them actually will crouch down on the ground or try to rapidly dig into the ground. And it's quite amazing if you watch one of them under threat, how fast it can go from bare ground to being underground. It's just a matter of seconds how fast these things could do that. So if you're a predator sort of trying to bite at the back of this armor plate, and this thing is actually going away from you underground, you can get pretty confused in a hurry. In the case of the 9-banded, they have 4 identical twins. So basically, they're almost like a clone of each other, and when they come out, it's one of the few animals that actually produces an identical twin. Many animals produce 2 young at this, the same cycle, but having 4 of them is pretty rare. So it's kind of a unique thing that happens with these species. And then just an idea of what they do here. Some of the stuff that they eat. So it's quite a variety of things all the way from carrion to fruits and insects and whatever. And then they also have these elaborate tunnels because they do live underground. I think all of them do. And then these tunnels will have little places for resting, for pooping, for storing food sometimes. Not very often the storing part, but sometimes they'll have other uses for some of the tunnels. And they'll have multiple entrances so that if a predator tries to dig them out, they can get out the back door, so to speak. And then the bottom little thing about the Hoover hog, during the Depression era, there was people didn't have food. So what President Hoover suggested was that you go out and hunt armadillos for food if you happen to live in some of the Dust Bowl regions and southern regions. And people kind of laughed at it at first, but I guess apparently they are edible. But then they started calling them Hoover hogs because of that. So it was just kind of a bizarre presidential solution to starvation is eat an armadillo. I'm still waiting for my T-shirt there as well. He was, I just have a side note here. So Hoover was accused of doing nothing to fix the economy. So they called this the Hoover hog as in celebration of how they didn't like what he was doing with respect to that whole Depression era there. So bats, I'm like, oh my God, bats are so hard. Oh goodness, there's 52 species, probably more, that are down here. I have such a problem with bats, trying to identify them when I see them. It's just like, what kind of bat is that? Big one? Little one? Not so big. They are nocturnal for the most part. Sometimes you actually get a good look at them. Mostly you just see this thing flying around. But they do various things from either being nectar hunters. I think we've all seen the flying fox videos. We have those giant bats that fly through the forest. Most of those are actually looking for fruit. We have other ones that actually fish. Most of them use echolocation to find various types of insects as well. So depending on the species, they can take advantage of a lot of different types of food sources. And many of them are the most important pollinators of a lot of the trees in the tropics. So we always think of our trees as being the pretty daytime thing with the flowers and stuff. Many of the tropical trees, those flowers close up in the day because they don't rely on diurnal pollinators. They rely on the nocturnal ones, which are the moths and the bats that come in, and they do all the pollination. So again, this is like an important cycle that happens. One of the things that's happening through the world now is the bat populations of most species are declining, particularly in North America from a thing called white lip disease. And there the problem is that if we were relying on any of those to be pollinators, then you have this whole pollinator group taken out of the cycle as part of that. If that disease or something similar gets going in the tropics, same problem. If you're relying on those to pollinate a lot of your tropical trees, it isn't going to happen because there's nothing else to replace them. So the decline of a bat species can have some very unusual circumstances and outcomes depending on what that bat species is doing there. So I won't go through all the rest of that, but just they're interesting to see, and it's more for me about never really worrying if I know what kind of bat it is, but I kind of like to watch the behavior because I have seen the fish-eating ones. I can hear some of the species. You can actually hear them echolocate. Most of them you can't, but sometimes you hear them clicking, and that's them sending a sound out to try to see if a moth or something is in the way of where they're flying. And then the sloth, which is what we kind of started with at the beginning of this. So just there's the three-toed and two-toed sloth. They're much more common in Central America, say Costa Rica, down south to Panama is sort of the stronghold of them. So they typically live in the trees. They're slow, as you know. They only poop once a week, so they don't literally. So they actually come down out of the tree, so they don't just hang their bum over the branch and go. They actually feel the need to come down to the ground and do that. And that's when they're most vulnerable to something like a jaguar that could eat them as well. They carry their young on their back for long periods of time, again, because there is no nest, and they do slowly wander through the trees, munching on vegetation. Their digestive system is so inefficient that they basically have to eat almost all the time if they're not sleeping. So they're always seem to be nibbling on something as they go through there. They move so slowly that they literally have algae that grow on them because they live in the damp forests. But they also have a species of moth that only lives in their fur. So the entire life cycle of this moth is within the fur of the sloth, well, some of the sloth species there. And so if you didn't have the sloths, you wouldn't have that moth, which means you might not have a pollinator again. So presuming there's a secondary use for whatever animal happens to be out there. So that's an odd situation. I don't know of any other group of animals in the world where you actually have an insect that does its entire life cycle on the body of that one type of animal. We have lots of other bugs that, like flies that will bug horses or deer flies that bug deer or something like that, where they spend part of their life using that animal as a host for something. But these guys, just the whole thing, it's just all or nothing. They breed on there, they raise their babies, lay their eggs, et cetera, et cetera. Then we have a group of deer. So for the most part, the deer that are in the tropics are very small, much, much smaller than our white-tailed deer at home. And so the brocket deer is one of the commoner types. Always deep in the forest, very quiet. And you can imagine a deer that's only like 1.5 feet tall. So they're not easy to see, when they go through the forest there. But it is kind of an interesting thing when you do see them because they just silently go through. They're not much bigger than the agouti that I mentioned before, which is really quite a small-sized rodent as well. So they act like a deer, though. I mean, they do the same kind of stuff. They have noises they make. They do the same kind of breeding cycle there as well. So we have a long gestation period, though, so almost 2/3 of a year. When they will, till the baby's born. Still shorter than I think a white-tailed deer. I think is actually longer than that still. And then about 6 months after the baby is born, it's weaned. So now it's out there, it's on its own. And they are precocial, which means that basically as soon as they're born, within minutes they can actually walk and move around on their own, which is important because there is no nest. So you got to follow mom if you're going to live. So they got to be up on their feet like a horse. They got to be up on their feet pretty quickly after they're born to get through. Male and female are monogamous, so you will find these pairs moving through the forest together. And really, they don't go in big herds like a lot of the other deer that we're used to do. They're very solitary in that sense. Here's our white-tailed deer, which of course I think we all know. And here, they also occur down here, although they tend to be a bit smaller than ours, than the ones that we see in North America. So, but very, very similar. All the behavior is the same. They still grow antlers. They still have young. 1 to 3 young, depending on how good the habitat is and how strong the female is as well. Now, they also have a bit of a challenge in the forest because the forests down here are a little different than the North American forests. We have a lot of branches, like we have mature forests. We'll have the branches up a bit higher. Deer can move through those. Moose can move through those in the habitats, whereas down here, there seems to be a lot more smaller trees with thick branches, lots of stuff in the way. So the white-tailed deer will have trouble, particularly the males, moving through those forests. So they tend to stay more in the open areas or the older forests where there's very little underbrush there as well. And then tapirs is another group of animals that is really, really neat. They're kind of but kind of related to the horses actually, and just sort of an odd-looking creature there. So they spend a lot of time near water. They have a prehensile nose, sort of like an elephant, in the sense that they can use that, and they can actually use it to push food into their mouth like an elephant could, only obviously much smaller than an elephant's there as well. And then they eat all the time because, again, they have a really, really inefficient intestinal system, gastrointestinal system. So they have to keep eating, and they poop out a lot of good stuff. So a lot of other animals will eat this partially processed food as part of their diet. And then, so the whole thing doesn't get wasted. It's just these guys take out some of the easy stuff, and then something else comes along and nibbles on the rest of it and makes that their meal. Again, like seed dispersal, I mentioned that with the monkeys, so this is an important aspect of what they do as well, that they can basically eat something, don't digest it, poop it out, and a new tree or some kind of plant shows up along the path somewhere there. One young is born. They're quite big. I don't know if has anybody ever seen a tapir? Just one or two? You've ever eaten one? Well, that's you. You're the animal eater. That's right. So a tapir is, well, depending on the species, but they're about this big at the shoulder, and probably, I saw one just not very long ago, probably about this long. So they're quite a large animal, really. There are some other species that are smaller, but some of them are, it's like, wow, you're like getting close to like, small horse size. So it really is quite neat to see them. They have sort of like a pig-like foot too, when you see the footprints in the mud, that they basically splay their toes because they are walking on soft ground a lot and they're quite heavy. So they have to stay on top of the mud, so they basically spread their toes almost like trying to make a snowshoe effect as they go through there. They can dive really, really well, which is, I guess, important if you're trying to escape a jaguar, although, as you know, that isn't necessarily foolproof if you're a caiman. And then I talk a lot about poop. Did you notice that? It's like, I'm sorry, but they poop in the water. And part of that has to do with trying to make sure, because they feed in a relatively small area, they don't want to leave a lot of evidence for the predators to figure that there's somewhere in here, there's 2 or 3 tapirs that live here. So if you poop in the water, then that gets swept away somewhere downstream, and it makes it a bit harder for the predators to use that clue in order to find food. They also have squirrels down there. They act just like our squirrels do at home. This particular one is called a red-tailed squirrel, and I won't go into it because it really does everything that our squirrels do there. And then opossums is another group of animals there. So in North America, we just have one. We have the Virginia opossum. Down in South America, Central America, you have many, many more species there. So for example, 78 species in South America. Hard to identify. You see lots of them out there on the roads if you're traveling at night. A lot of what you do when you go to the tropics, if you're going on a nature-y thing, is you do night drives. And it's to see the animals you never see during the daytime. And you would be amazed at how many things are out what looks like in a lifeless landscape during the day if you go on one of these night drives with somebody that knows what they're doing. It's really, really incredible to see the stuff that's out there, including things like the lizards and snakes and frogs and even sometimes the birds that only come out at night. It really is a good adventure. So if you're ever at an eco lodge, don't miss that opportunity. And these guys and gals know what they're talking about, so they'll tell you the creatures that you're seeing there. Not all of them have pouches. So marsupials basically are animals that carry their young in a pouch in their stomach. So Australia is pretty famous for that, obviously. But not all of the marsupials in North America, North and Central America, actually have a pouch. But they will still nurture the babies and carry them around to a certain point on them. The first thing you have to do if you're a baby opossum is you're born, obviously. The parent doesn't pick you up and drop you in the pouch. You're basically born, she'll lay there. You got to figure out instantly that I have to get off of the ground. I got to crawl up and got to go into the pouch. I got to find a nipple, a teat, and I got to attach to that. And if I don't do that in the first, I don't know how long it takes, but let's say hour, you're probably not going to live. So that's the first big test if you happen to be one of these opossums out there. And pretty remarkable to think. You can imagine our kids, if you just give them 1 hour to live or die. Be really quite shocking, but this is the reality of what wildlife go through there. This is the kind of food that they eat. They're very much a herbivore as well. They don't all play dead, as I think you sort of read, opossums all play dead. They don't. There's some of them that actually do that. The Virginia opossum is one that will, under certain circumstances, just roll over as if it was dead, and it'll confuse a predator. It confuses us if we see it. You think, oh, poor thing, it died. and then you turn your back and it's gone. It's just like, I think just some of the species that are listed on the right there. And then we have a few other things. This is sort of my everything else category. So llamas and vicuñas that I mentioned the other day, alpaca, those are all highland species. So we've seen 2 of the 3 of them on the journey. A whole bunch of mice and rats and moles. Moles look like mice, but they actually are an insectivore, which is a whole class of animals that eats specifically insects. And they eat them almost exclusively underground. So these are the ones that the mountain and the molehill that burrow underground looking for earthworms and Japanese beetles and the larvae and stuff like that as they move through the soils. Porcupines, I think you know what those are, and then everything else. So you have to come back on another cruise to hear everything else. But for now, that's it. Are there any specific questions before I set you free? I forget what this was. Okay, that's us. We're top of the food chain, not. It's like a cat, right? It's just like really, it's like right here, come on. You tall person. Okay, any questions? Yes. Okay, do jaguars ever threaten small children? I would think yes. It would be logical that like any cat that would live in a habitat, and if you live with that, then there's a threat. I mean, we at home think of the coyotes taking our dogs, and we get upset that the coyote took the dog, but the dog is food to the coyote. It doesn't know it's a dog, it just knows that it's something small. So the same thing would happen there. And I mean, you see this with all big predators around the world. I mean, Africa, I think we're very aware that lions kill people, that, not so much cheetahs, but the other big cats over there would kill people. Tigers certainly do. So yes, it would be a fact of life for them. And what the people have to learn is, how do you live with that threat? So part of it is that you keep your children close, or you watch them carefully. You don't just say, off you go, come back later today. And your kids know this too. You teach your children that there's a threat. We don't have to do that where we live, but if you live in the jungle, then your children need to understand that they're partly responsible for their own safety as well. So yes, definitely it would be a very real threat. But the other thing too is that there will be a tolerance of it. It's not that you want your kid to get eaten by a jaguar, but if it does happen, then you understand that that is part of the cycle. I mean, if you live where there are crocodiles, you learn that some people are going to die from the crocodiles, and it'll be your kin. And you don't like it, but it is a fact of life, and you don't kill every crocodile just to do that, because you have that crocodile for another use. You may use it for food as well. So the cycle intertwines rather complexly. Yes? I think they're bigger. She's asking, are the deer, the brocket deer, are they the size of a key deer? I think your key deer is a bit bigger, isn't it? Yeah, because it's like a small white-tailed deer. The brocket deer are even smaller. They're very, very tiny little deer, like really, just a bit above knee height when you see them. All right, well, thank you, everybody, for your attention, and enjoy your day.